I didn't realize I was dying. Not in any dramatic sense. My body was fine. My life was still moving. I was waking up every morning, going through the motions, responding when spoken to. From the outside, nothing looked urgent enough to deserve that word. But something inside me was quietly shutting down. I stayed because staying was easier than admitting how long I had already stayed. That's the truth I avoided for years. Leaving would have required me to face the weight of wasted time, the embarrassment of explaining myself, the fear that I had misunderstood my own limits. So I stayed. At first, staying felt temporary. Like a pause. Something sensible. I told myself I was being patient, that things would shift on their own if I just held on a little longer. I believed that endurance was a form of strength. Endurance became my identity. My life didn't feel broken. That's what made it dangerous. I had routines that worked, responsibilities that kept me busy, conversations that sounded normal enough. I wasn't failing loudly. I wasn't collapsing. I was functioning. Functioning hides decay. I remember when the days started feeling heavier, not because they were difficult, but because they were identical. I could predict my reactions before they happened. I knew what each week would look like before it began. Nothing surprised me anymore, not in a good way. Surprise had left quietly. I stopped expecting relief. I stopped expecting excitement. I told myself that adulthood is supposed to feel this way, muted, manageable, restrained. I believed that people who claimed to feel alive all the time were lying or irresponsible. So I lowered my expectations. People around me didn't worry. Why would they? I showed up. I smiled when required. I handled what needed to be handled. I didn't ask for help. I didn't cause disruption. I had learned how to disappear politely. That skill was rewarded. They called me reliable. Stable. Someone who could be counted on. I accepted those labels because they explained why I felt empty, as if emptiness were the price of being dependable. Inside, something was thinning. I didn't feel sad. Sadness would have forced me to confront what was happening. What I felt instead was a dull neutrality. A flatness that made it possible to keep going without resistance. Days passed. Weeks passed. Whole stretches of my life passed without leaving clear memories behind. When I tried to remember what I had felt during those years, I couldn't find anything specific. Just impressions. Shadows. I noticed it most at night. Lying awake, staring into the dark, feeling a pressure in my chest that wasn't anxiety and wasn't grief, just the awareness that something essential was being neglected. I would ask myself how long I could keep living like this. The answer was always the same. Longer than I should. I stayed because nothing pushed me out. There was no explosion. No betrayal. No moment dramatic enough to justify leaving. Everything was tolerable. And tolerance, when it lasts too long, becomes a trap. I told myself I was lucky. That many people would trade lives with me. That questioning stability was ungrateful. I repeated those thoughts until they sounded like truth. But late at night, when there was no one to impress, another thought surfaced: if nothing changes, this is the rest of my life. Not for a while. Not until something else happens. That realization didn't panic me. It settled in slowly, like cold. I felt it spread through my days, touching everything I did. I began to see how carefully I had organized my life to avoid feeling too much, wanting too much, risking too much. I had built a life where I could survive indefinitely. And that was the problem. I wasn't living in pain. I was living in absence. I had stayed where I was dying slowly because leaving felt harder than disappearing one quiet day at a time. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that if I didn't stop calling this survival, there would eventually be nothing left to save. After that thought settled in, this is the rest of my life, staying stopped feeling neutral. It didn't become unbearable all at once. It became visible. And once something is visible, it can no longer hide behind habit. I began to notice how much effort went into keeping everything exactly as it was. How many small adjustments I made every day to avoid friction. I chose my words carefully. I managed my reactions. I smoothed discomfort before it had a chance to grow into anything honest. I wasn't living. I was maintaining. People around me didn't question it. Why would they? Maintenance looks like responsibility. It looks like maturity. It looks like someone who has learned how to function in the world without causing problems. I was praised for my calm, my patience, my ability to endure without complaint. Inside, something resisted. My body noticed before my mind fully accepted it. Sleep stopped restoring me. I woke up already tired, as if I had spent the night holding myself together. My chest felt tight during ordinary moments, driving familiar routes, answering routine messages, sitting through conversations I could predict word for word. I told myself it was stress. Everyone is stressed. But stress comes from doing too much. What I felt came from not moving at all. I realized how long I had been postponing myself. Not dreams, myself. Every time I said, I can handle this, I meant, I can disappear a little more. Every time I said, it's not that bad, I meant, I won't ask for better. I had learned to survive in ways that required my absence. Late at night, I replayed memories not with nostalgia, but with suspicion. I searched for the moment when staying stopped being a choice and became a reflex. There was no single point of collapse. No dramatic betrayal or obvious failure. Just a slow agreement. I almost left. I almost spoke up. I almost admitted the truth. Each time, something stopped me, not fear exactly, but calculation. I weighed the cost of leaving against the cost of staying and always chose the option that didn't force immediate pain. Staying hurt less in the moment. So I stayed. But pain doesn't disappear when you avoid it. It accumulates quietly. It settles into your body. It changes the way time feels. Days start blurring not because they're busy, but because nothing in them requires your presence. I began grieving something I couldn't explain to anyone else. Not a job, not a relationship, not a version of my future I could describe. I grieved myself, the part of me that used to feel urgency, that believed discomfort meant something needed to change. That part felt distant now. Almost naive. The moral dilemma became impossible to ignore. If I continued staying, nothing catastrophic would happen. That was the promise of endurance. I would remain stable, intact, dependable. I would age quietly inside a life that asked nothing of me emotionally. If I left, truly left, everything would become uncertain. I would have to explain myself. I would have to face the years I had already lost. I would risk discovering that I had waited too long to start over. That possibility terrified me. Some nights, the idea of disappearing crossed my mind. Not dying, disappearing. Stepping out of the life that was slowly erasing me. Starting somewhere I wasn't already known as the person who could endure anything. The idea scared me. It also made my chest feel lighter. That contradiction stayed with me. I couldn't unfeel it. I couldn't unsee what staying was doing to me. Endurance had stopped being strength. It had become a way to avoid accountability for my own life. I tried to argue myself back into staying. I reminded myself how dangerous it is to leave stability. How many people would trade places with me? How irresponsible it would be to disrupt everything for a feeling I couldn't even name properly. Those arguments had always worked before. Now they sounded like excuses. Then came a moment so small it almost slipped past me. Someone asked me, without accusation, without urgency, "How are you, really?" I opened my mouth to answer automatically. To say, "Fine." To say, "Tired, but okay." To give the response that would end the conversation politely. Instead, I froze. The silence felt heavier than any confession. In that pause, I understood something I had been avoiding. I wasn't okay, and I hadn't been for a long time. Not in a way anyone could see. Not in a way that demanded help. I was dying quietly. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was panicking, but because something in me refused to keep pretending. I realized that my life wasn't breaking. It was fading. And the longer I stayed, the harder it would be to tell the difference between who I was and who I had learned to be just to survive. For the first time, staying felt like an active decision instead of a default. And once you see that, neutrality disappears. Every day you remain becomes a choice to continue disappearing. I didn't know yet what I would do. But I knew this: if I stayed where I was dying slowly, one day there would be nothing left to leave. I didn't leave with confidence. I left with clarity, and those are not the same thing. Confidence suggests certainty. What I had was something quieter and more fragile, the understanding that staying would finish what time had already started. I didn't leave because I believed everything would be better. I left because I finally believed that staying would make everything smaller. The decision didn't arrive with courage. It arrived with exhaustion. One morning, nothing dramatic happened. No argument. No breaking point. I woke up with the same weight in my chest, the same flat anticipation of another identical day, and something inside me simply refused to cooperate. Not loudly. Not angrily. It just stopped pretending. I realized that I had been asking the wrong question for years. I kept asking, can I survive this? And the answer had always been yes. I was very good at surviving. I had proven that repeatedly. The question I had never allowed myself to ask was different: what is surviving costing me? The answer was unbearable. Leaving didn't feel like escape. It felt like loss. I lost familiarity. I lost explanations that made other people comfortable. I lost the identity of the one who could endure without complaint. I lost the protection of routine. I also lost something else. The illusion that time would fix this on its own. The first days after leaving were disorienting. Silence felt louder. Uncertainty felt physical. Without the structure that had numbed me, my emotions returned unfiltered. Fear came first, sharp, accusing, relentless. It told me I had ruined everything. That I was irresponsible. That I would regret this forever. Some days, I believed it. But beneath the fear, something else was present. Not happiness. Not relief. Presence. I could feel myself inside my own body again, reacting instead of enduring. Even regret felt different, not like a weight pressing me down, but like proof that I was still capable of wanting something more. Life after leaving wasn't easier. It was uneven. I doubted myself constantly. I questioned whether I had waited too long, whether I had misunderstood my own limits, whether I was simply exchanging one form of suffering for another. But this suffering had edges. It responded to my actions. It changed when I changed. That alone made it different. I learned that staying doesn't always look like loyalty. Sometimes it looks like self-betrayal practiced so long it feels virtuous. I had mistaken endurance for strength and silence for stability. I had believed that if nothing hurt badly enough, nothing needed to change. I was wrong. What hurts slowly is the hardest to recognize. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It convinces you that you can tolerate a little more emptiness, a little more distance from yourself, a little more waiting. Until one day, you realize you've been waiting your entire life. I grieved what I had lost. That grief didn't disappear after I left. I mourned the years spent dying quietly, the parts of myself that learned how to disappear politely, the moments that passed without witness because I wasn't fully there. But I no longer confuse grief with regret. Regret comes from knowing you could have chosen and didn't. Grief comes from choosing and accepting the cost. I carry that cost willingly now. If you're listening to this and telling yourself that you're managing, that you're holding it together, that things aren't bad enough to justify change, listen carefully to what you're actually saying. Ask yourself whether your life requires your presence, or merely your endurance. Because there is a difference between staying alive and staying awake. I stayed where I was dying slowly because it felt safer than leaving. Leaving didn't save me instantly. It didn't make my life perfect. It didn't erase the damage. What it did was stop the bleeding I had learned to ignore. And that was enough. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight harder or endure longer. Sometimes it's to stop calling survival a life, and walk away before there's nothing left of you to carry forward.